Welcome to this UCL lunch hour lecture on 50 years of becoming a mother. My name is Meg Wiggins, and I'm a senior researcher at UCL's Social Research Institute. Much of my research focuses on the evaluation of maternity care in the UK, and I'm one of the co-investigators on the 50 years of becoming a mother study that will be discussed today. Before I introduce our speakers, I just wanted to start by mentioning that this year, 2026, is a special year for UCL as we are celebrating our 200th anniversary. It's now my honor and pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Rachel Arkell, Charlotte Faircloth, and Kate Arrington. To start with, Dr. Rachel Arkell is a social legal researcher with an LLM in medical law and ethics, an MA in Methods of Social Research, and an LLB in European Legal Studies from the University of Kent. She completed her SENSS ESRC-funded doctoral research at the University of Kent, exploring the communication of risk with regards to medication use during potential pregnancy post Montgomery versus Lanarkshire Health Board in 2015. Charlotte Faircloth is Professor of Family and Society at the UCL Social Research Institute and leads the 50 Years of Becoming a Mother project. She is a key contributor to Parenting Culture Studies, a groundbreaking interdisciplinary field that situates parenting as a key topic for understanding contemporary society. Her anthropological research focuses on reproduction and parenting, and has covered topics including infant feeding, couple relationships, intergenerational relations, and most recently, the impact of coronavirus on family life. Our final speaker, Kate Arrington, is an interdisciplinary researcher with a background in medical and health humanities. Her PhD at Birkbeck, University of London, and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine investigated public communication and understandings of risks during pregnancy from 1948 to the present day. Alongside this research, Kate co-founded the broadly conceived research network for scholars interested in reproduction. I will now hand over to Rachel, Charlotte, and Kate for their talk.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Meg. I am going to be talking with Kate and Rachel today about a 50-year-long programme of research on women's transition to motherhood, using it as a way to think both about changes in maternity care and early motherhood, and to think about some of the methodological, practical and ethical challenges of carrying out research on the same topic over time. So in sketching a social history of a research project, we're going to use this, the 50 Years of Becoming a Mother project, as a case study for thinking about how social scientists might illuminate the temporal kind of dynamics of change. So trying to capture how individuals, as well as researchers themselves, experience and interpret broader social shifts. So what we're going to do today is give you an overview of each of the previous studies that have already happened within this programme, looking at their specific sort of methodologies and key findings before moving on to the current study. And in particular, we want to talk about how looking back can help us think sort of better about the present moment, as well as how that can inform our plans for kind of repeating a study 50 years on. So Sinead, sorry, could you go on to the next slide? Thank you. How do women in modern Britain experience becoming a mother? So asked a modest grant proposal put by Anne Oakley to the Economic and Social Research Council in 1973. She called for a planned and organised research into the social, psychological and emotional aspects of women's transition to motherhood. The application was successful, and Anne went on to lead a groundbreaking study which established the academic status of motherhood as a social institution and mothering as a social practice. These were radical propositions at the time, and they played a really critical role in establishing what has now become an international and multidisciplinary field of research. So the original study, what we call BAM1, was carried out between 1974 and 1979. It explored the experiences of 55 largely white, English and Irish, middle and working class first-time mothers in London, recruited via a London hospital, from early pregnancy to 5 months after their babies were born. In 4 interviews with each mother, 220 interviews, the study generated nearly 550 hours of recorded material, largely transcribed by hand at the time. The audio tapes have recently been moved to the British Library as part of their acquisition of Anne Oakley's archive, though other study materials like her transcripts, notes and coding remain in her private collection and are available to the current research team made up of Meg, as you've met, and me, Kate and Rachel. And we are all members of what is now the UCL Social Research Institute. So next slide, please. The findings of BAM1 drew attention to wider social structures like lack of information about motherhood or low levels of paternal participation, which made the experience of becoming a mother so difficult and isolating for many women. And these findings were taken up by healthcare user groups and health professionals, provoking a sea change in practice and policy around maternity care. And as you can see here, were widely discussed in media at the time. If you'd like to watch a clip of Anne talking about the study in the 70s, you can do so on our website. Anne's research led to 2 books now kind of considered classics in the field. You've seen them on the previous slide. Becoming a Mother, which was later published as From Here to Maternity, an account that prioritised women's own narratives about motherhood, and also Women Confined, which offered a more kind of theoretical analysis of postnatal mental health. So on to the next slide, please. So 33 years after the first study, a historically comparative study of the experiences of a new, more diverse set of first-time mothers was undertaken. And they were more diverse, particularly in terms of their ethnicity and socioeconomic background. This was funded by the Bupa Foundation. And this was based at the same hospital and included 58 women. The study explored the impact of changes that had taken place in the services provided to mothers and analysed the ways in which demographic and social changes in women's lives had influenced their experiences of becoming mothers. So the study design, sample size and methods were all quite similar to those used in the original project, but there were 2 sort of notable changes. First, that the interviews questions were revised with the overall number shortened. And second, an additional interview was added at 18 months postpartum to sort of capture the experience of women returning to work. And that was a more commonplace phenomenon than had been so in the 1970s. Again, recordings and electronic transcripts are in Anne's personal archive, stored actually in the basement of the building we're in, as well as on UCL servers. The findings pointing to medicalisation and anxiety as enduring features of women's experiences were congruent with a systematic review that the study team did at the time. So on to the next slide. The third study was a follow-up of the 1970s sample. This was funded by the ESRC and took place 37 years after the original. So the team managed to trace 37 of the 55 original women and re-interview them. At this point, the women were in their mid-60s and some had already become grandmothers. With the aim of exploring the long-term impact of birth experiences, they were asked to reflect on what had happened to them. Analysis of these data prompted significant kind of temporal comparisons, as well as some really interesting insights around the sociology of memory. Again, the notes were preserved by Anne in her personal archive, but the transcripts are already available to other researchers through the UK Data Service. So that's what we've done so far. If we go on to the next slide, we can tell you a little bit about what we're planning to do now. We've been funded by the ESRC between 2025 and 2029 and are partnered with the British Library to bring together as well as extend the previous studies. And so the project is kind of comprised of 3 overlapping but distinct phases. The first, which Kate's going to talk to us about, is the secondary data analysis of those original accounts from the 1970s. The second is that Meg actually and Anne have been leading on our follow-up interviews for the 3rd time with the original women, as well as any daughters and granddaughters who are willing to take part. And then finally, Rachel will talk to you about a repeat study with a new cohort of women at the same London hospital 50 years on. So interviews with the original women and their daughters and granddaughters are currently underway, and they give us a really nice kind of longitudinal but also intergenerational perspective on the transition to motherhood. It's modelled very much on previous interview schedules, but this time we're looking a bit more at kind of values around parenting and particular practices such as feeding and sleeping, as well as the changing role of partners. And so combined with the original and first follow-up interviews, we're going to have three sort of sequential time points with these women, the 1970s, 2010s and 2020s, allowing us to better understand these transitions over time and their sort of significance for individuals, both, within their own life course and within family narratives. And we're going to be using analysis of those three sets of accounts with the original women to inform data collection with the new cohort of women. And again, that means we will have three sort of comparative time points at the same hospital in the 1970s, the 2000s and the 2020s. So next slide, please. We've got a really fabulous advisory group who are on hand to support us with project design. This just gives you a kind of overview of who they are and the kind of sectors that they come from. And then we can go on to the next slide, if that's all right. The award of this new grant has sort of given us the chance to reflect on what it actually means to do a research project over 50 years, in this case by the same researcher, as well as by newer members of the team like us. So again, if you'd like to see more on our website, you can see a little summary there from me, Anne and Meg about the project. So next slide, please. What has changed in the last 50 years? Obviously quite a lot. There are demographic, cultural and medical changes since the 1970s that have significantly changed the context in which women become mothers in the UK. Maternity services and childcare are very different, as are ideas about family life, gender roles and sort of parenting more broadly. But all of that said, childbirth remains a major and common event in the lives of women. Nearly 80% of women in the UK become mothers by the age of 45. And with the growing use of reproductive technologies like IVF, increasing numbers of women are actually having babies well after that point. But there's also changes such as the age of first motherhood. If you compare, 2025 to the 1970s, there's greater ethnic diversity, changes to the sort of heteronormativity of families, changes in female employment, the establishment of parental leave, subsidised childcare, and so on and so forth. And obviously, more recently, we've had the COVID pandemic, which I think has had a lasting impact on patterns of work, care, and some would say declining fertility rates as well. But in focusing on sort of practices, as sociologists and historians, such as birth itself, what you can kind of see here is that it can often operate as a really interesting barometer of these broader social shifts. So whilst a third of the BAM1 women did have their labours chemically induced or accelerated, and almost half had assisted, so forceps or ventouse deliveries, only 2 of the 55 had C-sections. And national figures of C-section in England at the time were relatively low, 4% in 1970s, whereas today the rate is actually 43%. So you can see there's been huge sort of changes in the practices of birth in particular. Next slide, please. But I think it's also important to kind of recognise that there's something cultural going on as well in terms of how we think about motherhood. Now, this is a very sort of silly meme which circulates on social media, updated sort of now and again. But it gives you some kind of inkling of what we're interested in, because people have really noticed that in the last sort of 30, 40 years, there has been a real kind of shift in the way we think about raising children. There's a more kind of child-centered ethos, or a move to what's been called a kind of intensive parenting ideology, such that parents, both mothers and indeed fathers, are expected to invest increasing amounts of time, energy and resources in raising their children. Now, the emergence of that shift has been put down actually itself to the emergence of infant developmental psychology, popularised in the 1970s, which sort of in turn established this assumption that we now take to be common sense, that experiences in pregnancy and early infancy will have critical and lifelong implications. So there's now a well-developed field of expertise and social policy, which situates parenting as a really suitable way of affecting wider social inequalities. So there's a whole kind of body of policy in the UK, particularly interested in the first 1,000 days. So Start for Life is one example, or the Royal Foundation, kind of the first 1,000 days idea. Now, of course, the intensive mother who invests all this time, energy, and money in her child is not, what all mothers in the UK are doing these days. And it does obviously, rest on very middle class ideals of good parenting. But I think it's fair to say that it's become something of a template, certainly for policymakers. And there are numerous parenting programs which now exist to kind of educate parents about the importance of the early years. And these are often actually targeted at what are called hard to reach groups. And obviously, the extent to which this is internalized by parents varies according to lots of different factors. But a lot of research has shown that this has had a kind of negative effect on mothers because of an increased sense of pressure and anxiety. The impact of social media has also been shown to kind of amplify a moralization of what we might call everyday reproductive practices, so such as how we feed babies or where they sleep. Hence some of the interest with the new phase. And whilst we see echoes here of the post-war Bowlbyism that stress the irreplaceability of early maternal-infant bonds, this is a message that does seem to have been magnified and kind of altered in tone in this sort of digital era. So this leads us to our research questions. Sinead, if you could click on. Because I think these kinds of shifts that we're noticing are not actually something that have been documented empirically over time yet. And in the BAM study, this is what we're kind of hoping to do by comparison of the kind of old and new cohorts, but also through reflections across the life course, and specifically with kind of mother-daughter pairs. So how did our original women recount their experiences at the time? And how do they reflect on what we might call cultures of mothering now? Looking at how their daughters are with their own children. And how might this more kind of intensive understanding of motherhood, including the pregnancy period, be represented when we compare, 1970s advice to that of from the NHS today? So I'm going to hand over to Kate now, who is leading on this first phase of our research, as I said, which is looking back at the original accounts and reanalyzing them to inform our current inquiries. Over to you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, as Charlotte has said, I'm going to be talking about the part of the project that I'm leading on, which is the reanalysis of the 1970s transcripts. Some of the brilliant documentation that we still have at UCL is in this photograph, in these brilliant red filing cabinets, which gives a very lovely sense of looking at material history as well as looking at audio and, other forms. Next slide. Okay, so earlier Charlotte talked about some of the changes in parenting and maternity care over the last 50 years, and I'm just going to expand on that a little bit. Some of the changes that I've thought about are the location that people give birth. Yes, in the 1970s, there was already a turn towards hospital rather than home birth in the UK, but I think hospital spaces themselves have also changed. You don't, for example, have nurseries to separate the newborns from the mums overnight. The postnatal hospital stay is much shorter, from 10 days in the 1970s to perhaps just hours today. The technology has changed as well. Pregnancy ultrasounds were only just being rolled out in the 1970s, whereas they form part of standard practice today. There are more antenatal tests available and an increase in fetal monitoring technologies, both antenatally and during childbirth. Another technology that has changed is pregnancy testing. At-home pregnancy tests were not widely available in the 1970s, and if you could buy them, they were often very expensive compared to today. Instead, women often had to have their pregnancies confirmed by their GP, which is a very different dynamic to what we have today. Since the 1970s, there's also been an awful lot of change in maternity service provision as well as activism. There is now more of a focus on patient-centred care and choice. Maternity pay has also been introduced, as well as changes in how we perceive bottle and breastfeeding. Next slide, please. So how can looking back at these changes help us to rethink the present moment? At the same time, how can thinking about themes today colour how we understand the original transcripts as we reanalyse them? This is a bit of a tricky set of questions because if you ask a historian, they might say you should avoid applying a present-day lens to historical materials, but rather try to understand them within the context in which they were produced. The original BAM 1 study, for example, was influenced by lots of different factors, from Anne's own reflections in a previous study on housework, to changes in maternity services, as well as the women's liberation movement and concerns over medicalisation. The study was therefore inflected with its own historical present. In our reanalysis, however, we are attending to anxieties that feel prominent today around infant feeding, sleep, potty training, the role of fathers, and mental load. When we look for these concerns in the historical material, we find they are present in the data, but less prominent in the original analysis of the results. In this way, we are identifying new themes in the historical data, and I'm saying new in inverted commas. At the same time, we're questioning the novelty of these themes in the present. Treating past and present as part of a broader historical construction allows us to surface continuities as well as change. Next slide, please. So what do I mean about looking back and looking forward and, how these inflect upon each other? I'm going to lead with the example of potty training. Potty training has been in the news a fair bit in recent months. So this was a clip from Loose Women where they were talking about Catherine Ryan and other celebrities who have started this trend of early potty training. So this is in February. It's on YouTube if you want to watch it. In this clip, the presenters are discussing what is framed as a recent trend in early potty training. This they link to the environmental impact of disposable nappies, the potential economic impacts of reusable alternatives, as well as the social implications when children attend school before they're able to go to the bathroom independently. They also gesture towards changing parenting cultures in which parenting has become what they describe as competitive. All of this appears to be a new phenomenon, or somehow indicative of the present moment. Yet, in our reanalysis of the BAM 1 transcripts, we have evidence of one mother who began potty training at just 10 weeks. So with this example, we can question the novelty of present-day claims and actually put them into a longer narrative. Next slide, please. Now, working with archival materials has not been without its practical challenges, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time shedding a bit of light on these. Next slide, please. First, when cataloguing the original tapes, we discovered a small number were missing. In an attempt to have a complete record, we're investigating means of filling this gap. We have, for example, the handwritten notes from the time. Could we turn these into transcripts of sorts? Unfortunately, the handwriting can at times be quite difficult to read. As well, the notes often include personal codes, which are difficult to decipher. This picture, for example, with the codes being in the letters in red, would anyone in the audience be able to figure out what these meant without the schema underneath? As you can see, these codes can be quite tricky to interpret, and even with Anne still involved in the project, recalling the details from 50 years ago isn't always straightforward. We also face challenges with deteriorating audio quality, transcription accuracy, and transcript formats that were incompatible with the analysis software that we were using, all of which has caused further delays. Next slide, please. A persistent conversation we have within the team is the ethical implications of the project. While it's now standard practice in sociology to make data publicly available through the UK Data Service, this raises particular challenges when working with historical material. The original study was conducted at a time when data sharing was not standard practice and when consent procedures and expectations around data storage were very different. This raises important questions about consent and our ongoing responsibilities to both participants and the original researcher. We continue to revisit our ethical approach as new information or concerns emerge. At present, we are making every effort to contact original participants to inform them of our intention to archive the data, and the British Library is redacting all personally identifying information during transcription. Next slide, please. Okay, for my final reflection, I want to focus on what it means to research the research, and by extension, the researcher. Next slide, please. Having access to the interview transcripts rather than only the published books and articles opens up the study to a form of methodological auditing. It allows researchers to see how knowledge was produced, while also exposing the work to critique. At the same time, the transcripts provide a more intimate insight into the research process. The image on the slide shows an excerpt from one of the transcripts where the person being interviewed is commenting on baby books. She describes them as cloying. Books where you record the baby's first words, baby's first steps, and so on, and then shares how she recorded her own experiences and how her children have become quite interested in their own birth stories because Anne is conducting this research. Because, of course, as well as a sociologist researching mothers, Anne herself was and is a mother, and this is reflected in the transcripts. Moments like this reveal the lived material conditions of research and offer insights into Anne Oakley's life as well as her practice, making visible the entanglement of motherhood and sociological research. So these are just some of the reflections from my own work on the BAM 50 project, as we're only just getting started with the bulk of the reanalysis, but I'm really excited to see where it all goes. I'm now going to hand back to Charlotte to talk about the next phase of the project with the follow-up with the original mothers.
Yes, so I'm actually kind of leaping in and speaking for Meg a little bit here. So Meg, do feel free to correct me at any point. But you can see here the sort of progress that Meg and Anne, as well as actually a colleague, Mary Sortel, who has come back to work on the project, having worked on it in the past as well, have made with following up the original women for a third time, as it were. So as you remember, there were 55 women interviewed in the original BAM project. They've actually managed to follow up with 37 of the original women who agreed to be re-interviewed. Actually, only 36 at the time were conducted. But now, in the latest phase, they've managed to interview 17 of the original women, as well as 6 of their daughters. That 4 more have agreed, as well as 4 more daughters. 4 have unfortunately died, and 2 have refused. And there are 10 who have not yet responded, but we are still trying to get in touch with. So it's really early days, you know, as Kate says, like for all kind of phases of the project, and it's probably a little bit premature to speak too much about, you know, any common themes or findings from those interviews. But a few kind of thoughts from Meg, Anne, and Mary so far have been that, you know, it's been quite interesting in terms of how stories are remembered. There's maybe been a little bit kind of less focus on birth and early motherhood, but there are certain stories within that where they've become very performative and remain very, very clear. And actually, for some women who had traumatic births, the memory of those have remained really kind of very clear indeed. A lot of women have kind of observed that there seems to be a lot less professional support in the postnatal period for their children than when they became mothers themselves, as in for their daughters who are now becoming mothers. So one mother, for example, remembered the local weekly drop-in baby clinic as being a really valuable kind of routine source of support and company in the 1970s, and there was no such kind of resource more recently for her daughter. I think for some women, reflecting on their relationships across the life course has been quite poignant. And for some, actually quite traumatic. They had very sort of difficult relationships. But all of that said, many are able to look back with that from this perspective with kind of calm and pragmatism. A lot of women spoke about work and how that fitted into their life courses. And in some interviews, it's become sort of, it's come out that work was usually sort of primarily around money and had to kind of fit in around the needs of the children. It was less kind of career focused or professionally driven, not for the whole sample, of course. But there was a kind of observation that daughters of the original women did seem to be more kind of career driven. Fourthly, grandmotherhood is a really big deal for these women. They were really proud of their children and grandchildren, and many had very kind of positive relationships, although some had seen their children and grandchildren through some very, very difficult times, including crime or drug use or serious illness. And many had enjoyed time spent with grandchildren, particularly actually during those difficult periods when they could be a kind of calming presence. But some did sort of mention that they felt too much was expected of them by their daughters, I think particularly in terms of childcare. And that's definitely a kind of tension we'll be looking at more in the study. And then finally, just on sort of gender and changes to the role of fathers, many were really impressed with their sons and their sons-in-law, who they saw as really good dads who were able to kind of prioritize their children and who did a lot of the day-to-day parenting, as well as some domestic work. And in general, dads were seen to do a lot more these days than the 1970s. So I'm going to hand over to Rachel now, who's going to talk to us about the repeat study.
Please. Thank you very much. Can I have the next slide, please? So our repeat study, we're delving into the question of what is the transition to an experience of first-time motherhood? What is it like in London in 2026? So this includes exploring aspects of antenatal care and childbirth through to early motherhood and potentially the return to work, as Charlotte mentioned. So this research question will help us uncover and explore some of the continuities and changes in this transition, as it offers, as Charlotte mentioned, a third empirical point of time. So from the first original BAM to the first repeat and now this second repeat. We've stuck to some of the core criteria. So any participant must be receiving antenatal care from the same West London hospital as the first two studies. They must be pregnant with their first baby. They must be aged 18 and above. And for the interview study, they must be able to conduct an interview in English. Though we fully appreciate that the language requirement means that we are limited in the range of experiences we're able to capture, it was very much a practical decision that we needed to make. Please, could I have the next slide? So there are two distinct arms of this new repeat study, an observation study and an interview study. So speaking first about the observations, in the first original Becoming a Mother study, Anne spent 6 months observing the antenatal clinics of this West London hospital. Put simply, her aim was to find out what went on in a maternity hospital and observe encounters between doctors and patients. The aim was not to evaluate a service provided, but to inform her interview study. In total, she observed over 900 individual consultations over this time, and to date, this data remains largely unpublished. So while we're not aiming for the same scale of observations, we hope to observe up to 5 routine consultations. And this will be across a range of gestational ages. And the aim will be to facilitate a historical comparison with some of Anne's data, and also to help capture what antenatal clinics are like in 2026. As Kate mentioned, there have been some changes. So for the interview study, we're hoping to recruit a sample of 55 women, so sufficiently similar to the first two studies, and again, receiving antenatal care from the same hospital. Like the first two BAM studies, we will interview participants 4 times throughout their transition to motherhood, from pregnancy up until 18 months postpartum. So can I have the next slide, please? So delving further into what we'll be looking at in our interview study. This slide explains the timing and the primary focus, both of which are quite important. So we'll speak to participants once during pregnancy at around 24-ish weeks during pregnancy. We're hoping to recruit around 20 weeks. This timing will help capture comparable data to the original BAM and the first repeat, while being able to hone in on some of the contemporary anxieties that Kate mentioned. Importantly, in line with the first repeat study, some of the questions will be worded in exactly the same way, so this can kind of help us with that historical comparison. So the first interview will focus on knowledge and expectations of pregnancy and motherhood, and we'll also be speaking to participants about their experiences of antenatal care and the choices they're making. The second interview will focus primarily on the birth story. As Charlotte mentioned, these are kind of big standout moments and transitions to motherhood. And it will be able to capture some early experiences of motherhood, including reflections on their partners, if our participants are in relationships. In interview 3, where the participants' babies will be around 6 to 8 months, we'll be delving into the experiences and choices regarding, for example, infant feeding, sleeping, weaning, and potty training. And it's a good time point to kind of see how earlier expectations of early motherhood matches up to reality. And then in the 4th interview, which Charlotte mentioned was in addition to the first repeat study, we'll explore the experience of mothers returning to work, which was very much not the norm in the 1970s. Being the final interview, we'll also explore how things might have changed for the participants and how support, particularly in the postnatal period, could be improved. The next slide, please. So in approaching this repeat study, it's important to recognise, what's going on during this current point in time. As Charlotte and Kate have both mentioned, we've seen huge changes in both motherhood and the wider social context. So in the last decade, we've seen a series of critical reports into maternity care, from the Kirkup report in 2015 to 3 that are currently in progress at the moment. So the National Maternity and Neonatal Investigation, also known as the AMOS review, and the reviews into Nottingham University Hospitals and Leeds Teaching Hospitals, both led by Donna Ockenden. Currently, birth, and in particular birth trauma and maternity crises, are regularly discussed across mainstream media and increasingly on social media, as seen in some of these recent headlines. As a research team, I think we're all interested in how pregnant people are making decisions about their care and how this care is being experienced. Further, with the rise of social media as a core source of information and support during pregnancy and early motherhood, we're interested in exploring what makes information trustworthy, for example, and how information sources have changed since the first 2 BAM studies. Next slide, please. And to just reflect briefly on how we're approaching our sample, our intention is to explore the greater diversities that a population in 2026 reflects when compared to the 1970s and the 2010s respectively. On this slide, we've included a small snapshot into the sample from the original and then the first repeat study. We can see an increase in average age, more family diversity, and greater ethnic diversity in the repeat study. Through choosing this West London hospital as a recruitment location, we're of the view that London can often act as a magnifier for some of the trends that we're hoping to explore, such as quote-unquote older motherhood, or the use of assistive reproductive technologies. And we'll be actively trying to ensure that our sample includes diversity of ethnicity, age, class, use of reproductive technology, family forms and structures, and medical complexity. And on to the next slide, please. So to give a brief update of where we're at, again, it's very early days, so we're in the process of obtaining all the institutional and ethical approvals we need to start our study. And it's really interesting to reflect on the process we're in when compared to, what it's been like over the last 50 years of this research programme. So as Kate touched upon, the processes of conducting research have also changed considerably. And when Anne was conducting the original BAM study, research ethics looked considerably different. Access to the hospital was granted based on an interview, and she was given full access to antenatal clinics to conduct her observations for several months. Today, as many researchers possibly listening to this presentation will have experienced, there are a number of different steps that must be taken before research can start. Some colleagues have shared that in some cases it has taken over a year to gain ethical approval before study recruitment can start. So perhaps optimistically, we're hoping to start recruitment for this phase of the study in September 2026. And now I will hand back to Charlotte for some conclusions.
Thank you. That's it really. Hope you've enjoyed hearing about our project, and this has kind of given you a flavour of what's to come. Obviously, this is very much the start of a new phase, and so our conclusions are really kind of partial. The interviewing is ongoing. The repeat cohort remains subject to the approvals Rachel just mentioned. So we're not sort of making, sweeping claims at this point. But I think hopefully you can kind of see that this programme of work itself kind of clarifies, what's at stake in doing research over time, particularly into maternity. And we hope you found it interesting. We'd really welcome your thoughts. Hopefully you all have the Slido link that was emailed to you in advance. And you are very welcome to post a question there. This is our website, as well as the full list of people working on the project. So yeah, do check it out.
I can see that there is one question initially, and it is about whether you will contact the mothers who weren't re-interviewed in the 2010s, as they might feel differently or have more time 10 years later.
Meg, I should be deferring to you on this one.
I easily could answer it if you want me to.
Well, please, yeah, go on. It's definitely your domain.
Yes. When we were looking for the women in the 2010s, the original women to interview, most of the women who weren't interviewed were never located. We tried a variety of routes, including getting special permission to go through their GPs, and in that situation, we didn't actually have their contact details because the GP sent on our information for us. And in that situation, if we didn't get any response, and we had no response from any of the other routes where we tried to find these original women, they just were uncontactable. So while we'll do some investigations to see if we can find them, because not least we want to tell them about the archiving of the materials, to date, we haven't found any of those women who originally we had no details for, who never contacted us when we got in touch with them. We had a couple of women who refused at that time, and we will go back to them now, just to inform them and also to ask them. Women that we did have details for. And then sadly, there was one woman who had died at the point that we were doing those 2011 ones. So we'd love to, is the answer, but the scope is limited, I believe is the best way to define that. But now a question that is not for me, but for one of you to answer is, could you talk a little more about different family formations in the repeat study, e.g. single women, same-sex couples?
Sure. Rachel, would you like to talk about this? It's definitely going to be sort of part of our sampling strategy, isn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, reflecting on the first sample, very much, I think almost all of the couples were married, if not all of them. Let's see. Yes. So in the first BAM study, 87% were married and living together, 13% were living with a partner and not married, and single motherhood was not kind of captured in the first BAM study. We saw an increased diversity in the first repeat study, and this is something that we're very much hoping to hone in on our new repeat study. So we've seen a lot of different trends in family formations, which Charlotte might be able to speak on a bit more. But we're approaching our sampling strategy purposively, which means we're going to try and reach these groups of people who may, be single by choice, who may have experienced relationship breakdown throughout their pregnancy, and we want to capture as many diverse experiences as possible.
Yeah,
really.
Absolutely. And so some sort of previous research has looked a little bit at the kind of use of reproductive technologies and how that has enabled what we might call kind of new family forms. There's a whole group of researchers actually in the Thomas Coram Research Unit just around the corner who look at this. And so we'd be really keen, for example, to work with families who are headed by two mums. It might be the case that we're able to find someone who's acting as a surrogate for two gay fathers, for example, but it will slightly depend on who is receiving their treatment from the hospital at that time. But we're very much kind of aware of this as a marker of sort of broader demographic shifts. And I think as I can't remember which one said it, Kate maybe said like London sort of acting as a bit of a magnifier for some of these. I think we're really conscious about London in that sense as well, how it's not necessarily kind of England. So yes, it's definitely built into our sampling.
A couple more questions have come in, both very interesting. One is, what would you consider a surprising outcome or experience? And how do you think you will divide the mothers?
A surprising outcome of
I suppose I'm interpreting here, but I'm guessing it is in terms of let's say in the repeat study, something that might be a surprising outcome or experience as a comparator.
I don't know. I mean, I guess we're kind of open to anything. I suppose this sounds probably awful, and maybe it wouldn't be a surprise, but we're half expecting that we might encounter some people who have a really difficult time with conception, pregnancy, certainly birth. The sort of definition of birth trauma is something that has kind of emerged in this 50-year period. So we're sort of fully attuned to the fact that we might be hearing some quite difficult experiences from people. Perhaps then the surprise would be to find someone who said, oh, it's completely fine, it was brilliant, I loved it, can't wait to do it again. I don't know, but obviously we'd love to hear that as well.
I think part of the surprise as well, looking at the historical data, is what I was speaking about earlier, is these claims of novelty at the moment. So for example, the potty training that is sort of being talked about a lot is this new phenomenon, where actually we're seeing it in the historical data. And so I think that will be one of the surprises that we find, is actually the things that we are looking at today have a precedent, which we're able to kind of track through the data.
I think actually as well, it's a really good point, is that I was sort of talking about the project at another conference recently, and somebody sort of made the point that actually we often think about things 50 years ago as being like really kind of regressive, but actually, in the 70s, there were, lots of dads who were quite involved and really on board with being a present parent and that kind of thing. So of course things have changed, but I think we need to stay aware to the fact that there are more continuities as well.
Another question is, how will you share the findings from the project with a public audience?
Oh, this is very much one for Kate, our resident public engagement and guru.
So in addition to publications, conferences and talks like this, we're looking at different public engagement initiatives as well. We've got a video currently on our website, if you would like to watch that, which is showing a clip from an interview that Anne gave back in the 1970s, which was for daytime TV, talking about her project. We actually have access to the larger clip, and we would love to do some sort of film screening, possibly invite the original mothers to view that alongside women today who are possibly pregnant or working in maternity services. So that's one of the ideas that I'm not saying is going to happen, but I'm saying is, I'm looking into. But yeah, we're quite excited to try and find some creative ways of getting this project out into the world.
Yeah, and I think, that's something that all of us on the team kind of share, and actually has always been at the heart of what Anne has done as a sociologist, is sort of writing and, talking to a broader audience. So even at the time of sort of designing the project, we had hopes of, developing some kind of TV programs, podcasts. We all regularly speak to journalists in written and audio media. So I think we're really, keen that the findings are shared as broadly as possible, but also that we think about this as a process of kind of knowledge exchange. So what might we be able to learn, for example, from documentary makers or archivists or whatever it might be. So it's a kind of two-way process as well.
And I think as well, looking towards the end of the project, which seems a long way off yet as we're just embarking on it, is as we come to a close, are we able to do something to mark the end? And one of the things that we've been investigating is if we're able to use any of the audio from the original recordings. They're not the best at the moment, just the deteriorating quality of 50-year-old cassettes. But that's something that we're hoping to look into further.
Yeah, that'd be lovely.
No, we don't seem to be at the moment getting any other questions through. So I think at this point, what is left for me to do as the chair is to let you know that we have a lecture next week, UCL's lunch hour lecture on ethics and the future of health, which will be on Thursday, the 26th of March from 1 to 2 p.m. Information here is on screen as well. And just to say a huge thank you to our three speakers and to you as the audience. Thank you for attending today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.